1967 was the year where it all started for rock. We had Sgt. Pepper, we had the Velvet Underground and Nico, and we had The Doors' first album.
The Doors emerged at a time when there was a whole revolution going on. I mean, 1967 is always held up as the year when everything changed. Really, all the groundwork had happened in '66.
When I first heard The Doors was a single called Light My Fire, and that would have been in the 60s, probably around 67. My God, I was absolutely impressed. I had never heard anything like it.
Well, when The Doors' first album came out, it sounded a lot different from a lot of stuff that was around at the time. And if you compare it to stuff that was coming out of San Francisco or London, it had a completely different sound.
The album turned up at the beginning of '67, featuring some of the songs that they'd already been working on since '65, plus a whole bunch of new ones, which combined just to make it one of the debuts of all time.
A lot of people have said it is one of the best debut records in the history of rock music. My impression is I would put it up there in the top 5 for sure.
It's interesting that they actually recorded it in 2 weeks, and they recorded it with a producer that they hadn't met before, a guy called Paul Rothchild, who produced all but one of their albums. It turned out to be a marriage which Elektra Records made, but it was one that was made in musical heaven.
Light My Fire definitely was the Doors' first big hit.
A catchy tune, instant success for The Doors with this song.
Light My Fire turned out to be a pretty successful single for The Doors and one of the songs they'll always be remembered for. But it wasn't written as a single. They basically came in, created an album and thought about the commercial possibilities afterwards.
Interestingly enough, a lot of people assume Jim Morrison wrote that song, but actually Robby wrote that song.
When I talked to Krieger about Light My Fire, he said it was the first song that he ever wrote.
Light My Fire was the first big Doors song. That would be the second single. In America, that was released as the full, what was it, 6.5-minute version, and they didn't edit it, and that was startling. No one released, well, Dylan had, but nobody really released singles that length.
They had to do a radio edit of it because the song was way too long for AM radio. And people started hearing it on AM radio. It went way up the charts. And the FM players, all the stations could play the long version.
The song was originally 7 minutes long, but they had to make a single length, get it down to about 3 minutes time, which they cut out the keyboard solo and Robby Krieger's guitar solo.
It was a real sign of the time type song. It came out and you know, throughout the year 1967, that was their hit. And a lot of people, when they play stuff about the 60s, they'll play that song because it really encapsulates an era.
The song performed live would go on and on even longer. That was, I think, the highlight of The Doors was their live performance. People didn't really get to see how great they were until they saw them on TV or saw them live. They heard the single, catchy tune, but when they saw them live, true Doors fans loved the fact that Krieger's solo went on or Ray Manzarek's keyboard solo went on as it did on the album.
A lot of their live performances are fantastic, I think, and I think they show the band up very well. Unlike a lot of bands at the time who were kind of put together in the studio, they really could play. And if you listen to them live, some of the performances are scorching, they're fantastic. There are versions of Light My Fire that I've heard that are wonderful.
Ray Manzarek's organ, which was totally his own. I mean, no one else I suppose Pink Floyd might have been they weren't even really going then, you know, so that was totally his own devising. Robby Krieger was more of a jazz kind of guitar player, and he was kind of, he again had a sound you could only mistake as him, you know, this Quicksilver fluid jazz guitar mixed with the blues. John Densmore, of course, was a jazz drummer. He sounded more like Elvin Jones some of the time than Charlie Watts. So it was a very free-flowing backdrop for Jim.
You know, with Jim's voice, that sort of raw, bluesy voice on top of this Latin-type groove, it was exciting. It was a very different type of tune.
Light My Fire was built on John Coltrane's version of My Favourite Things by, you know, the song that's in The Sound of Music, but John Coltrane did like this huge version of that. So they took a kind of undercurrent of that as the freewheeling bit mixed with Indian ragas.
Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player, came up with the signature introduction, and John Densmore came up with the beat, the drum beat, and Jim came up with some of the lyrics in conjunction with Robby Krieger. So it was really a band effort, and one which I think was justly, or is still very much justly associated with them.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah. We chased our pleasures here, dug our treasures there, but can you still recall the time we cried? Break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.
Break On Through is the first song on the album. Any Doors fan, true Doors fan, will tell you that this is the true essence of the Doors. It was Break On Through that led them to the Doors name.
They figured that they were the doors of perception, which linked the known and the unknown. So breaking on through had a very specific meaning. Break on through to the other side. Go through the doors from the world that you know, the world that you're certain of, to an exciting world of possibilities. So Break On Through, while not perhaps their best known track, was one that was quite significant for them.
With Break On Through, I find it interesting because I think it relates back to Los Angeles. You have this lovely sound, this kind of lovely light, hallucinogenic sound, which fits Los Angeles, because if you've ever been to Los Angeles, the whole place is like a film set. And people only drive, there aren't many people on the streets. It's a very vertical city, and you've got the light, which makes everything seem slightly unreal at certain times of the day. And it's already like a hallucination, it's already like a film set. And if you look at the lyrics to that, Break On Through to the Other Side, I think it could only have come from Los Angeles.
Jim's favourite book was a thing called City of Night, which would later give him a bit of LA Woman, but it's a recurring theme. That inspired Break On Through, like lyrically. But on the other hand, the riff for that came from Paul Butterfield Blues Band's Shake Your Money Maker. So that's an example of how they kept meshing things together, which now is the norm. Then it wasn't. And the climate in 1966, though, and 67 was that you could get away with doing all this stuff.
Oh, yeah!
Break On Through, that was a song that the Doors performed a lot in the bars. And it's got a neat beat to it, very different.
They based it on a bossa nova rhythm, which up until then that meant the girl from Ipanema or something, you know. So they had this kind of vamped up bossa nova rhythm, and it was kind of like, hello, we're here.
The drummer opens with a slight jazz riff. In comes the keyboards, kind of accenting with the drummer. To make that a little bit thicker, the guitar player mimics the keyboard player. Suddenly the song's starting to swell. It's waiting, and then all of a sudden a strange sound, like a moaning guitar or a moaning bass sound, just kind of goes in and out, kind of just making that sexual, throbbing sound, and then the voice. Absolutely incredible. What a great way to open an album.
1967, The Doors' debut album, self-titled, starts with a 2.5-minute song called Break On Through. 2.5 minutes of perfection. What a way to introduce side one of a record from The Doors.
That was the one song that Elektra was really pushing as their first single. So the first time that they did a tour up and down the coast here on the West Coast, that was a song they played a lot, and that was the song that they were pushing. And it did get a lot of radio airplay, but it wasn't until Light My Fire came out that's when everyone started taking notice of The Doors. But it's a really good song, and it's a great way to lead off the first album.
Why show me the way to the next whiskey bar? Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. Show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. For if we don't find the next whiskey bar, tell you we must die. Tell you we must die. Tell ya, I tell ya, I tell ya we must die. Oh, moon of Alabama, we know must say goodbye.
The Alabama song was the first of 2 cover songs that they did on the album. It was actually taken from an opera entitled Mahogany.
It was a Brecht and Weill song, and Ray Manzarek had an album of their songs, and I think it just took the imagination, took the attention of Jim Morrison, so he thought he could make something of it, and clearly it became one of their more off-the-wall tracks.
My wife Dorothy had the record, and we used to listen to the record, the original cast recording, and we used to listen to the record all the time, and she said, "Why don't you do the whiskey bar?" And Jim said, "Yeah!"
We all loved it, and it had this great kind of German oompa kind of beat, and we adapted it for The Doors.
This just shows the extent and the range of this band, from, you know, straight ahead bar blues to something that's just kind of a little left of center.
I thought, this is too weird. But then I got into it, and I found out about Kurt Weill, and we did it so well, people thought we wrote it, and we had to correct them all the time and say, no, this is from a German opera.
Or show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. Show me the way to the next whiskey bar.
When you got to Alabama song on that first Doors record, you got a glimpse into the quirky world of the Doors. You know, melodically and musically, it was a bit off-kilter.
Alabama song, for me, I think is an example of when the Doors could sort of just create like a scene in your mind if you just closed your eyes and listened to it. I've never been to Alabama, but you really felt like you walked into some old, you know, saloon with a wooden floor and there's dust all over the place, and you walk up and order your whiskey.
They make it kind of reeling from bar to bar and so on, and they take the European heaviness out of it. They take the pessimism and fatalism out of it and make it seem almost fun. It's like something coming in, and it's got that lovely ambiguous feeling of 1,000 girls, 1,000 thrills, or going from bar to bar. And it's in his vocals, it's kind of, it's never, you never know whether he's saying this is awful or this is great, possibly because he hadn't decided at that time.
They suddenly pop up on the album with this song by Brecht Weill, which Jim apparently liked for its futile desolation kind of let's go to the next whiskey bar, which ironically would be within a year is life. It was very pathetic, that song.
It just showed how diverse they could be. And I think it's still pretty popular today when you know you still hear it on FM radio quite a bit. And again, it just showed another side of the Doors that you weren't expecting after listening to the rest of the album. It was very, very different.
Yeah! trying to sleep. I'm out there making with my midnight creep, yeah, yeah. Back down, man. Drum in, don't know, but little girl, you understand, don't you, darling? Ha ha.
Backdoor Man. Well, the Doors cut their teeth playing in different bars around the Los Angeles area, like the London Fog, and then they got their residency at the Whiskey A Go-Go. But when they first started playing, that was one of the mainstay songs that they would play when they were in the bars. And the freshness of their first album was because they'd been playing those songs for at least a year and a half, almost every night. So when they went in the studio, they just blasted through these songs because they were very, very, very fresh. They knew all these songs inside and out. And Backdoor Man was one that would really get a rise out of the crowd when they were playing it live. So they knew that they had to have that one on their album.
This is the reason why they stayed American, staying true to blues. I think they worked this song onto the album because I believe it was a crowd pleaser.
This was a track where they really got down to their roots. Not perhaps a typical Doors track, but one that I suspect went down rather well in concert.
For me, it is one of my favorite Doors songs, just partly by Morrison's performance, but you have to give it to Krieger on this one.
Robby Krieger quickly proved with a song like Backdoor Man that he had a firm footing in the blues and could deliver it both tonally on the guitar and with incredible taste in terms of the notes he chose to use and the way he chose to bend them, unlike a lot of people playing rock and roll.
He's a fireball of electricity, and I think, knowing how much of a blues fan Robby Krieger was, I think that he had to have a hand in the inclusion of that on the debut record.
I found that song on an album by John Hammond Jr., and it's actually written by Willie Dixon. Most songs were.
Backdoor Man, which was written by Willie Dixon and first recorded by Howlin' Wolf. That fitted Jim to a T. I mean, it was about a bloke. The backdoor man in old blues mythology is, while the husband's away working hard in the fields, this geezer slips in through the back door.
Backdoor Man is about anal intercourse.
This song also, lyrically, had a little bit to do with Jim's life, because I know for a fact that Jim, through many books and through interviews, videos that I've seen, he used the back door.
You may eat your dinner, eat your pork and beans. I eat more chicken than any man ever seen. Yeah!
It's about a guy who eats more chicken than you've ever seen. You men come home and you eat your pork and beans. I'm the backdoor man. You men are gone. I sneak in the back door. I eat more chicken. And it's about a gigolo. It's a Lothario. It's a gigolo. It's a blues gigolo song.
They used to start their sets with that one, and that was kind of Jim's declaration of intent. You know, I'm here, the backdoor man.
Jim Morrison made it his own. He put a lot of menace into the song. I think the men, when watching him perform, had no idea what he was talking about, but the women in the audience certainly knew what he was talking about.
Yeah. You love me, don't you, baby? I knew you would. Climb all over me, baby. Touch me. Come on, play with me.
Right. You could tell by the way Jim sang it that he'd been around the block. You men eat your dinner, eat your pork and beans. I eat more chicken than any man ever seen. So he was singing from experience.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. Of our elaborate plans, of everything that stands. I'll never look into your eyes again. Can you picture what will be so limitless and free, desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land? Come on, baby!
The End is one of the Doors' major pieces, 11 minutes or so long on an album, sometimes even longer than that in concert.
I suppose the most startling thing about that album was the end. But the end started life as a 2.5-minute song about saying goodbye to your girlfriend. I mean, it was a throwaway pop song.
The End started out just to be a little love song. Jim and I were over at my parents' house for a couple of weeks because they left town. And we wrote a whole bunch of songs at that time. And the end was just, this is the end, beautiful friend, this is the end, my only friend. And it was just a couple verses, you know. And so we would do it in person, and then all of a sudden it started getting longer and longer.
I think it was the first rock song that was over 10 minutes. So we were kind of proud of breaking the 3-minute barrier.
It was a real showcase, I think, for the band, you know, and when they played it live, they'd often, in their first year or so as a band, would end their shows with the end.
What it encapsulates about the Doors is almost the fact that you can't be quite sure what they're talking about. Is it the end of a relationship? Is it the end of the world? It could be more or less the end of anything, innocence, childhood. You can take it and you can make what you want from it. Obviously, Jim Morrison thinks he knows what it's about, but maybe he's the only one who can say for sure.
There was something really quite unusual about that particular song. It was you can tell the Doors used to jam a lot and used to turn, songs would come out of the jams. And I think Robby Krieger's, you know, Spanishy, sort of slightly Indian-y influences created the template, the backdrop for this song.
Krieger's guitar playing is wonderful in that, and most of his guitar playing is very simple, and he's not afraid to be simple, which I think is one of the things that distinguishes them.
And we were in this house and there was a sound like silverware being dropped on linoleum, and then somebody ran through the room and they said, "Have you seen the accident outside?" And everybody said, "Hey man, have you seen the accident outside?" Have you seen the accident outside? 7 people took a ride. 6 bachelors and their bride. 7 people took a ride.
This is a song that toys with you. This is a song that takes you to a peak and then brings you back down. I'm impressed by the journey this song takes you through.
It was this song that got them their record deal. They were playing the Whiskey A Go-Go, probably the most famous live rock venue in the world, in Los Angeles. And it was the lyrics that made people go and perk up. So it was this song that record executives heard them performing at the Whiskey, where they said, we like this, let's talk to them about a record deal.
The night that the famous Father, I Want to Kill You thing came about was because Jim was tripping and he didn't know he was supposed to be on stage, so they had to go get him from his apartment, and he was high as a kite, and they planted him on stage, and the end went on like it did. And by now they'd added this kind of raga, Eastern kind of guitar thing which would go on. And then Jim started going on about fucking his mother.
It was just sort of a hint of things to come, you know, from Jim Morrison and the things that were inside his head.
It's definitely a good way to end the first album. A very good track.
I don't think it's dated. I think it could come out today. It was the product of the years before, I guess. You've got this picture of a young band really excited to finally get in the studio and do something. And that hasn't dated at all, no.
Love me 2 times, babe. Love me twice today. Love me 2 times, baby. I'm gone away. Love me 2 times, yeah. 1 for tomorrow, 1 just for today. Love me 2 times, I'm gone away. Love me 1 time, babe. Could not speak. 1 time, baby. Yeah, my knees got weak. But love me 2 times, yeah. Last me out through the week. Love me 2 times, I'm gone away.
Strange Days came out in 1967, and it was sort of the Doors' darkest album.
Here's an album that confused me, and I enjoyed it. It was surreal. It was psychedelic.
Strange Days obviously was recorded as they were now successful, and they were able to experiment. I'd say that Strange Days is probably the most psychedelic, but the dark underbelly of psychedelia, the bad trip.
They had a far better studio setup for the second album. They had all of 8-track recording equipment, and they were very keen to make an album that was an advance on their first. Musically, perhaps in a way it was. In other ways, obviously, very few second albums make the impact of the first. But Strange Days wasn't a bad effort.
It was almost impossible for the Doors to follow up arguably one of the best debuts in rock history, but I think they did it with Strange Days.
Love me 1 time, babe. I could not speak. Love me 1 time, baby. Yeah, my knees got weak. But love me 2 times, girl. Last me out through the week. Love me 2 times, I'm gone away.
The song Love Me 2 Times starts with a blues riff, which lots and lots of other bands are using, somehow manages to metamorphosis into a sort of pop cadence for the chorus.
Love Me 2 Times was a kind of an old song that was based on a bluesy riff of Robby Krieger's, and the lyrics were not necessarily about a soldier going to the Vietnam War, but every time the Doors sang something like I'm Going Away, because the Vietnam War was looming so large in America at the time, you'd assume that they were relating to that. But it is about someone going away, making the most of it before they do.
Love Me Two Times is one of those Doors staples. It has everything. I think the neatest part is that it has a harpsichord solo from Ray Manzarek, throwing in that just what the Doors did. They took what was pretty much a straight-ahead song and they added just a little bit of, you know, obscurity to it, and they throw in a harpsichord solo. Ray Manzarek, who was fantastic on the keys as always, but I think that every member of the band brought something to the Doors music, and that was Ray Manzarek's moment to shine, I believe.
Love Me Two Times is considered a mini masterpiece. This really was a big hit for the band. It had that psychedelic flavor, but also a bit of R&B flavor with a great little driving beat to it, a guaranteed hit for the band. They probably didn't know it when recording it, but as soon as it was heard by the fans and non-fans, it gave the band new fans who heard the song went, this is great, what is it? A definite hit from the get-go.
Love Me Two Times, it's a really good song. I think it's got a lot of really good feel to it. And, you know, it's got some neat keyboarding in there, it's got some neat drum rolls.
The standard way to play a rock and roll shuffle would be da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. And I found myself going, I played all across the drums.
It's a very good single, you know, in less than 3 minutes, you got a really good song that has lots of power and lots of energy.
When the music's over, when the music's over, yeah. When the music's over, turn out the light, turn out the light, turn out the light.
When the Music's Over, for me, a fantastic Doors song, one of the best ever, in my opinion.
When the Music's Over starts with a sort of blues riff, sort of dirty blues riff, and develops then into this sort of Jimmy Smith, the organ player's sort of funky-ish groove, and then goes off into another area that only the Doors would take it to.
Ray Manzarek really showing his skills as playing the bass line on his keyboard.
The thing with the Doors, they never had a bass player. That was unheard of. I mean, it was bass, guitar, drums, singer. That was your group. And he did it with foot pedals. I mean, the coordination of the man must have been remarkable.
When the Music's Over, it will always be bookended with the end, because it's a similar kind of long, drawn-out piece that could be made into a concert set piece.
When the Music's Over was one of our killer long songs.
Again, that was another case of a song that had grown a little bit. That was much more dramatic. That was really sort of plugging in to the times, but the dark undercurrent, it was not peace and love at all.
What have they done to the earth? What have they done to our fair sister? Ravaged and plundered, ripped her and bit her. stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn, and tied her with fences and dragged her down.
Jim Morrison would go off on one for minutes at a time. In view of that, perhaps the studio recording would be considered a little bit of a prototype, but it's certainly quite a track for Doors fans, and particularly because the music finished very abruptly, as one that in retrospect is regarded as a bit of a signature tune.
When the music's over, you're dead. That's basically how I think these guys, and Morrison in particular, saw the song.
For the time, and there was a lot of race riots and protest music, this is a great protest song because, as everyone knows, in it Jim Morrison screams, "We want the world and we want it now." You know, dealing with political issues was nothing new for the Doors, but I think this is one of the best examples of how they did it with a great song and a great message.
We want the world and we want it now. Right, Mama? Now.
I think probably a lot of these songs Paul Rothchild's still producing, he'd give them freedom in the studio to jam a little bit and improvise, and these things would come out of it. Because it doesn't sound like someone's come to the studio and gone, "Here's the riff, man, let's build a song on it." It sounds like they've just started playing. And Jim Morrison was writing lyrics all the time, whether he was in the studio or not. And so I think he would probably just maybe take a piece of paper that he'd written and start singing, and that a song would then develop out of that that would then put into the repertoire. And I feel this is probably one of those songs.
A song, you can only say that it was so full of passion and also very intense.
A great finale for a record. It was to that album perhaps what the end was to the Doors' debut. Elongated, epic, incredible.
People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange. People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down.
People Are Strange was perhaps the Doors' attempt to recreate the success of Light My Fire, which hadn't been intended as a hit single, but when it was edited down from its longer version, became one. So on each album from then onwards, generally the Doors would try to find something that could come out as a single.
People Are Strange, another good song. That was another Morrison one. I believe it was based on a poem that he'd written.
People Are Strange is another Doors classic. Very intriguing lyrics that probably mean a whole lot today as they did when they were written back in the 60s. People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces are ugly when you're alone. Everyone can relate to some time in their life, maybe Jim more so than others.
Classic song about alienation and just feeling, walking down the street and just looking at these people that you don't know, and it's probably a song of paranoia, you know, after he was dropping so much acid when they made that album.
When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange.
It's on the whole a very dark album. It's not like the rest of the stuff, because by the time that came out, like Sgt. Pepper had come out and people were more tuned in and turned on. But the Doors were going completely in another direction.
By the time of Strange Days and the second album, they were starting to have problems with the dynamic within the group, which isn't unusual. Lots of groups have that, especially when there's one charismatic frontman who's getting a lot of attention and three sidemen or musicians who are not getting as much attention. He started to play games, I think. He would hold them up in the studio. He would take too much time. He would piss off the engineer and the producer as well as the band.
I think they were about to enter into a period where Jim got more difficult. He was great when he was on acid because that inspired his creativity, but the next 2 albums would be very tricky for them to make. Nightmares, in fact.
Wait until the war is over and we're both a little older. Unknown soldier. Breakfast where the news is read, television, children fed, unborn living, living dead. Bullet strikes the helmet's head, and it's all over for the unknown soldier. It's all over for the unknown soldier.
Waiting for the Sun, the Doors' third album, was probably when a little bit of backlash set in. They had been acclaimed as being fresh, new and different, but by the time of the third album, perhaps the cracks were beginning to show.
It was the Doors' third release, successful with new fans. A lot of people accuse them as making an album targeted towards teeny boppers or the teen movement.
A lot of fans that I have talked to over the years also thought that this was a departure for the Doors. I don't believe that myself.
I think after 2 great albums in a row, Strange Days and the debut, it was almost impossible that they could live up to the bar that had been set and the standard that they had achieved for themselves.
They've been touring for the last 2 years. They haven't had time to sit and write or to be playing a lot of different things and having the time to write and produce stuff. And a lot of people claim that this was the problem with this album.
Make a grave for the unknown soldier, nestled in your hollow shoulder, unknown soldier. Breakfast where the news is read, television, children fed. Bullet strikes the helmet's head. It's all over. War is over.
Unknown soldier. Wow. There's a stab at the Vietnam War.
That was really the most graphic reaction to the Vietnam War, which was so hopeless and just a massacre now.
The Unknown Soldier was the first overtly political song Jim wrote, which was not mentioning Vietnam, but, you know, the Unknown Soldier.
At the time, it seemed like the norm. People would come out and they would protest and speak against things. I think the Doors did it in a way that was a little bit subversive. Jim Morrison would provoke people with his lyrics. You know, obviously his references to Jesus and to God, he was baiting the audience, and he basically, I think, wanted them to think for themselves. And Unknown Soldier, it was almost prophetic in a way because he was using it, an anti-war rant, and blaming the media. And obviously 30 years later, we see what role the media has to play in wars, and I think Jim Morrison was ahead of the game on this one.
When they did it live, they'd use their instruments, like the guitar became a machine gun, and Manzarek's hand would be raised in the air and then he'd come down, the crash, the gunshot, and Jim would fall to the stage dead. I mean, that was their out-and-out protest, you know, to the Vietnam War.
I think the claim to fame with that song was when they performed it live, and Jim would recite the little piece of poetry in the middle bit of the song there. He would actually fall to the ground when the guns were fired. He would fall dead to the stage, and that was pretty effectful at the time.
The song The Unknown Soldier is a bit like a little 3-act musical, a 3-act play. And I think really this song was led by Jim Morrison's idea. I think he probably started singing a melody based around obviously his lyrics, and the rest followed. And where they go from the beginning of the tune to the end of the tune, I think could only come from a band that played a lot together and jammed a lot together. So as I say, it's quite unusual because it is like a little trilogy or a 3-act play. Very unusual little piece.
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. She's walking down the street, blind to every eye she meets. Do you think you'll be the guy to make the queen of the angel side?
The first single off Waiting for the Sun was Hello, I Love You, which came out quite a while before the album did. That's another song written on the beach in 1965. An innocent song written by Jim when he saw a girl walking past, and just started singing along to himself, Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Which he sang to the melody of All Day and All of the Night by the Kinks, which was so obvious on the record, the Kinks sued, and they ended up having to pay the Kinks royalties on that song.
The Doors could be accused of retreading their past. In fact, in this case, they were retreading somebody else's past. But it was the hit single on the album that the Doors and their record company expected to produce each time round.
A song like Hello, I Love You divided critics greatly, although it was a huge success, and that was partly why people were critical of it, I think, because they felt that the Doors were taking the kind of the hippie love revolution thing and were watering it down.
When the band went in to record this album, they weren't really prepared, and I think a lot of fans noticed this, especially on the song. A catchy number that it is, I think fans kind of thought it wasn't their best effort, and they wrote a lot of the material while they were in the studios, whereas before they really prepared for each and every album, and I think true fans noticed that it wasn't as good as it could be, but they still liked the song.
Trade winds find galleons lost in the sea. I know where treasure is waiting for me. Silver and gold in the mountains of Spain. I have to see you again and again. Make me Spanish caravan.
The song Spanish Caravan, it was great to hear Robby Krieger playing a bit of Spanish guitar. Obviously, he studied a bit of that, and he even hints a little bit at some Segovia playing there.
Robby Krieger was playing around with this flamenco guitar riff called Asturias, which is like a classical guitar figure, and it became Spanish Caravan. Manzarek hopped aboard that, you know, and they turned it into this kind of, you know, flamenco epic. I mean, that was Doors' creativity. Nothing to do with Jim, though. Doors' creativity between the three, really firing.
Spanish Caravan's actually a really great song, very cool song. It starts off with this folky kind of style, and in true Doors fashion, it really starts to electrify. Maybe you can compare it to a folk band like the Byrds or Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. But the way it starts surprises everyone, and then all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, it's the Doors, because it finally electrifies.
Spanish Caravan was pilloried by, I think it was the LA Free Press, as being perhaps the worst lyric of any rock song they'd ever heard. So I think everyone was aware by the time that Waiting for the Sun had been issued and reviewed, and generally in a downbeat fashion, that something was going to have to change. So the Doors saw that and they made the changes.